Hello and welcome to Fireside FileMaker, a podcast with John Mark Osborne and Michael Richard talking about everything FileMaker. Hello, this is Michael Richard. Today we're going to listen to part 2 of the most fascinating conversation John and I have had in a long time with Rick Kalman and Robert Holsey of Claris International, talking about where FileMaker is, how they manage it, and where they're going with it. Enjoy the podcast.
Tell us a little bit about Claris Connect and how it's going to exist, how it's going to fold into the existing product development cycle. I believe that, and I won't even try to pronounce his name, I'll let you do it. The gentleman who was, running the stamp play, Giuliano, and I can't even try his last name, is going to be the product manager. Go for it again.
It's Jacobelli, I think.
Yep. I've heard people say Iacobelli, but I think you are actually correct, Michael. Yeah, so it is a separate product. As you've stated, we've gone from becoming or being FileMaker Inc. to being Claris. And of course, history-wise, people may be aware that our origins are in a company named Claris. And when we formed FileMaker Inc., we focused right on the FileMaker product line. And with the rebranding, we're taking that name again, and we're also adding additional products, just like Claris had back in the day. And so it's a separate product. With a separate team and run on a separate schedule. So it's not at the same, release schedule as FileMaker. In fact, it will be coming out prior to the next release of the FileMaker platform. And it can, of course, work with FileMaker Cloud, and with FileMaker on-premise, but it also isn't necessarily require FileMaker to work with it. We're one team. All the product managers are under Srini, who's the new VP of Product Management and Design. So we all work together, and of course, everything is interrelated, but they work on separate schedules as well as FileMaker Cloud, which has its own release schedule. So we really don't have this once a year monolithic, release anymore. If you were at DevCon, you heard us announce that our next generation of FileMaker Cloud that doesn't require you to go to Amazon AWS, go through the marketplace, have an engagement with Amazon and also with FileMaker, but you just come to us, you're up and running really quick. That's coming out at the end of October. Then our intent is early next year that the first release of Claris Connect comes out, and it will be our first Claris branded product. And then we'll follow that with by FileMaker platform release. And then after that, I think you'll see us iterating much faster in the future, and not everything just sort of hitting once a year.
Do you think that Claris is going to be on more of an acquisition cycle now by buying products like StampPlay rather than developing it internally?
It's a potential, if we could find other acquisitions of the caliber of StampPlay, and it made sense to our long-term strategy, definitely it's something that we would look at. And we've done acquisitions in the past. Sometimes it's technology. People who remember CDML may have realized that it was something created by Blue World that was Lasso 1.1, and we acquired that technology. It's something that we'll look at as we broaden out our portfolio. We'll keep our eye open. We're definitely not closed to it by any stretch of the imagination. It's a perfectly legitimate way to sort of jump. It would have taken us years to build what StampPlay had already built, and the fact that we can go from introducing the Workplace Innovation Platform last August and talking about the integration category of that, and a year later come back and say, we have a new workflow engine that'll integrate hundreds, if not thousands, of services out there without having to worry about endpoints and all of the complexity of APIs. You can just drag and drop. That would have been impossible for us to do in a year without stopping to do everything else. So, when it makes sense, it makes sense. And, it's an exciting new product for us to have.
Well, as somebody who has struggled with the API stuff because I'm not a real programmer, I'm just pure FileMaker, and API stuff is over my head, and to be honest, I'm not terribly interested in it, but I'm terribly excited about what Claris Connect will be able to do.
Yeah, I mean, that's really FileMaker and now Claris's DNA. I mean, if you think about it, we're really trying to take very powerful capabilities and technologies and make them accessible to someone who's trying to solve a specific business problem. And they're probably not a computer programmer, they're not a DBA, they're not an IT person, they're not a classically trained person, but they are certainly adept at being able to put these things together. And you're trying to solve a problem. So do you really want to spend 35 hours trying to figure out how to connect FileMaker to a data source? Or do you just want to come into the product and say, I need to connect this to that, and boom, you do it. And then you take those extra, 32 hours or 33 hours you have left over and apply them to solving other problems. So I'm with you. I was the lead webmaster, and I came out of an era where if you were doing web pages, you were writing HTML. And then the WYSIWYG HTML editors came out of there. There was, Adobe had one, Claris had one, the Claris homepage. And there were purists that said, no, you've got to hand code or else you don't know what you're doing. But the people that went to the WYSIWYG HTML editor started cranking out web pages in orders of magnitude more productivity than the ones that were hand coding it. And out of that, we had an explosion of the internet economy. So I think FileMaker is that same way. Do you really want to futz around getting to the end that you're seeking, or do you want FileMaker to do the hard work so that you can get to that end rather than spending the time doing to get it? And I think that opening up the RESTful API to all of our developer community, rather than just the small percentage that really knows that, is a huge leap forward.
Yeah, I think it's important to note something about what Rick is saying that maybe is obvious to some people and not to others, is that Claris Connect is its own product without FileMaker, but it enhances FileMaker tremendously. So hopefully people who don't really understand Claris Connect yet will at least understand that it's going to make your FileMaker much better.
Yep, well said, John Mark. Thanks for that clarification.
Well, I think it's also going to do another thing, Rick, and the thing you said, who wants to spend 35 hours building an API? Well, the truth of the matter is the client doesn't want to pay for that. So if we can eliminate the cost of billing for that time that we're saving, not even if we're just saving the time to do something else, but by being able to do it quickly and easily, we can keep the development cost down for the client and deliver a solution faster and cheaper.
Yeah, I think there's going to be a symbiotic relationship there, because some have thought, well, that's billable hours I'm losing. It's like, no, you're spending 30 hours doing something that if you could do in 2, what would you do with those other 28 hours? And right. So, you can get another client, or you can impress that client quicker. You're going to keep that client longer. We all know the lifetime value of a single client if you hold on to them, right? And it can be quite a bit. I mean, I've been a consultant as well, and it's uncanny, right? So the more you can deliver, the better relationship you have with them, the more things you can say yes to, and you don't have to pull your hair out and work over the weekend trying to make it happen. Then I think it floats everyone's boat.
Yep. Robert, are you still there? Because we've lost you for the moment.
That's too bad. Probably we've lost him for the rest of the interview, but Rick's doing a pretty good job. So I think you wanted to ask about another question about Claris Connect, about competitors.
Yeah, I mean, Zapier is, from what I understand, it does the same thing as Claris Connect. Am I correct in that? And was it just that it was too well established? The cost of buying it was too high, and Standplay was just a better deal?
Well, first of all, Zapier does similar things, but not exactly. So similar in the sense of making easy connections. If you're also aware of if this then that, it's similar as well. If this then that is literally what it says. So it's limited in the number of things that you can string together. And Zapier has more power. But there is even more power in Claris Connect than that for developers, especially. Now you don't need to do this, but you can extend out the capability. You can do things much closer to what you're used to doing with a combination of scripts, calculations, and logic, and do some very powerful things that you're just not going to get even from Zapier. Now, we were never considering acquiring something like Zapier. We would have more partnered with them. And again, the downside to that is that then the customer has to go to multiple, if they want to do integration and FileMaker, then they've got to, have an account and pay Zapier. They've got to, have an account with FileMaker. And if you're trying to do it with FileMaker or the Claris side, it's just easier to come with a one-stop shop. That's exactly, one of the reasons that we're doing our own cloud now as well, is so that we can control the onboarding experience. You're not using a different language. You don't have to have a relationship with another vendor, unless, of course, if you want that. And it's just much easier to get up and going and running.
I'm hoping that Robert's finally back. Are you there, Robert?
I'm hoping so too.
Yeah. So, and this is perfect because the next question is for you. So you talked a little bit about save as XML feature. I'd like you to talk about what it means today and what you can tell us about what it might mean for the future, because I'm really interested in this feature a tremendous amount.
Sure. Yeah. So we our grand vision for this is really, as I was talking about earlier, sort of introducing the portability that many in the community have tried to tackle in FileMaker today, and there's been some success there, but we believe there's a better approach. We started working on it, I want to say, with FileMaker 17. I can't remember exactly, but I know in 17 is where we introduced the add-on tables and our new starter apps. Many don't realize this, but when you launch FileMaker 17 and of course 18, in the Launch Center, when you under the Create tab, there's 6 starter apps. And those 6 starter apps actually do not exist on disk as FMP12 files. There's actually a folder that has a couple of sets of XML files. One is the core structure, and the other is actually a series of them, each language, all the strings in each of the languages. And so when you go into the Launch Center and you hit Create on one of those starter apps, behind the scenes, FileMaker is taking those 2 XML files and stitching them together to ultimately create your file. One immediate win there is in the localization case. Instead of us creating a version of that app for each of our languages, we essentially create that app once and then have our localization team put the strings in so that we can then, based off the region that the customer is in, create that file for them on the fly. Similarly, when you go through the portal setup in FileMaker 17 and 18, you may have noticed that there's a new option called new from table, I believe, or new from add-on table, and that brings up some UI. And in that, we've got 11 add-on tables. which again are not represented on disk in any other form than XML. And what that allows us to do is take that XML and actually inject it into your file. So we're bringing over the schema, the relationships, the layouts, everything that's necessary for you to create that relationship, store that data, and then present that to the user. And that was really us sort of proof of concept is not really the right word, because it was obviously a completely finished feature that we put into the product, but it sort of helped us validate where we want to take things. With FileMaker 18, we added the Save as XML option in the menu, as well as a script step. Part of that was us sort of completing the full representation of the file. In 17, we focused on the objects, the elements that we needed in order to create those specific starter apps, those specific add-ons. So things like, I think popovers were one thing that we didn't have the ability to serialize and deserialize as XML yet. But with 18, the goal is to get 100% fidelity, or as close to it as we can. That then starts opening up for a future where, again, the community, once they've created some awesome element, be able to turn that into an add-on and start sharing that either within their own org to reuse elements in the future, or better yet, start sharing that with the community through our marketplace, and really, again, taking that power and making it available to everybody.
I know one of the features that I created with the FileMaker 18 Save as XML feature was the ability to compare two files. And I just imported the two XML generated files from the old version and the new version, then compared them, and it would come up with a list showing you. So that's pretty cool stuff you can do with it now. It sounds to me like what you're saying is there's a possibility that you might be able to create an XML file that completely represents your FileMaker file and could possibly rebuild it.
That's exactly where we want to head. And so that helps us for things like validating that there's no corruption in a file. But the other thing that I'm really excited about that setting us up for is pushing updates to your file. Version management is a huge pain in the community right now that we hear loud and clear. One of our first steps was the data migration tool that we introduced, so that at least you didn't have to go through a manual import process, between your V1 and your V2 version. But we want to take that even farther and say, you've got your production version, you've got your changes that you need to push up to that, and XML will be the vehicle that allows us to do that.
Just to clarify that, it sounds very interesting. Are you saying that you'll be able to literally update the original file with an XML update, which would just contain the changes, or would it contain all of the XML for that entire file solution?
So the goal would be that you'd be able to save the copy, very similar to what you're doing today, where you save the V1 version, the V2 version, and you start looking at the differences, and then you could basically create out of that a installer file, for lack of a better term, that are those changes. Now, we still have work to do there. We're looking at how we do sort of replace, like I have this tab control that has some elements on it. I want to update that. Is that going to be a replace of that entire object? Part of this is also making sure that we've got unique identifiers for all objects across the app. So there is work that we're still fleshing out, but that's where we want to get to. Is we want to try to automate this experience as much as possible, and that's the XML is the road we're paving to get us there.
That's fascinating.
Are there any new features coming down the pipeline that you guys can actually talk about? Any favorite features of yours that you might just give us some insight? I understand if you can't say certain things, but it can't hurt to ask either, I guess.
I'll say from my side, there's definitely some blue sky ideas that we're exploring with the engineering team, and I don't think it would be beneficial for anyone to talk about those yet. But the more immediate stuff that I've been talking about, with the responsive layouts, the XML, I think those alone are the things that will drastically change how we build in FileMaker today. So much of building an app is building each piece individually. We all have our tricks and third-party tools that we use to try to reuse components as much as possible, but it's very difficult, and it's not something that a new FileMaker developer even has visibility to yet. And so when you look at add-ons, again, enabled by our XML, and then the sort of changes, that responsive layouts or the enhancements to the overall experience of the apps, I think those two things coming together are going to be game changing, again, as far as how and what types of apps we build on the platform.
Any comments on that, Rick?
No, other than there's no specific feature in the next release that we can really talk about at this point. Other than what I'll say is that we'll do another roadmap webinar probably in the November timeframe and talk more specifically about what's coming down the pike in the next release, and then beyond that, where we're heading. We've been doing that for the last several years, and I believe we'll continue that. And then, come around March time is when we typically do preview webinars, and we'll share all of the new features. This year at DevCon, we didn't even really do a product demo like we typically do, because we did a visionary keynote. And some of what we showed is definitely in the next release, but we didn't really call it out. So I don't want to steal any thunder from the marketing and sales side of the house. So I can't really talk about anything more specific than that.
How much influence does Apple have over the direction of FileMaker and specific features?
That's a fair question. Certainly, Apple doesn't dictate any of that stuff to us, and we're able to run as an independent organization. We work as closely with Apple as possibly can, and we certainly seek out their advice on the things that they're knowledgeable about. So we have a great symbiotic relationship, and I think we have the best of both worlds. And other than that, I'm really not authorized to talk about anything specifically related to Apple or our relationship. But it's it's a good one.
So our next question, and we may be getting into the realm of where you may not be able to answer things, but that's okay. We ask them and we hope for something, and and maybe we'll get what we want, maybe we won't. It's it's an interview. So now, so many, we talked a little bit about this before, but so many competitors separate the data and the interface. And why? I mean, FileMaker's always had them together, and I think that's for ease of use. Are there any other reasons why? Because I want to dispel this theory. This is my kind of one of my goals is that the separation of the interface and the data is a good idea. I think it's a bad idea, and I've talked about it quite a bit, written articles, and convinced a lot of people not to do it. Is there any other reason other than ease of use? I mean, because you can imagine working with the separated interface and data as it is right now, it's very difficult having to switch between the different files and put a field in here and then go back here and then do the interface. And they're small moves, but they take up time. And I've constantly told people, don't do it. Is there any other reason why FileMaker, from your perspective, either Robert or Rick, has everything in one file other than ease of use?
Not that I'm aware of. It's probably an historic artifact of how it was originally created. I think it does essentially lend itself to, the ease of use, sort of that, what is the secret sauce of FileMaker, right? It's all the things that it takes care of that you don't have to worry about. And so how it does that is being intimately aware of what's going on, right? And it's sort of, if you change the name of a field, we're going to take care of it for you. That kind of thing that, other people, other products don't offer, right? And so I think it's just part of what FileMaker is. We certainly get why there's especially for when you're talking about updating things, that you could update the interface, but the data is still there in the background, but there's still an interconnection that makes that difficult potentially. And I think that going forward, there'll be less of a need for that when we're able to infuse schema through XML and that sort of thing. But it probably is fundamentally about the ease of use. I don't know if there's anything else beyond that. That's more of a question you'd have to ask Clay if you get him on a podcast one of these days.
Yeah, it would be awesome, wouldn't it? Now, the next question I have is about live database development. And what I mean by that is some developers will do work on a database that's already on server being hosted and people are currently using it. Others say, absolutely not. I would never do that, even to add one little tiny button or one script. I would go and take the whole database down, import the new features, put the new version up there, and then, having worked offline on it first. I've been doing live database development, not from scratch. I'm not suggesting that you put the database up there and define all the schema and that, but once a database has gone through the first revision, it's completed, people obviously are going to have new features, and it's a time saver for me to go into the live database and add a simple little report layout. And so what I'm asking is, and I know that, in the past, FileMaker has made live development with certain releases better and easier to do. Specifically back in, I think it was 3.0 v5, they added the ability to make certain changes in managed database, whereas you weren't even able to go into managed database before. And so they've obviously supported this, but I've gotten feedback from lots of people that live database development is not a good idea. And I just, wanted to get your viewpoint from a technical perspective, knowing the engine, what that means for FileMaker.
Robert, coming from tech support, you may have some insight onto this. I think a lot is going to depend on the nature of the app that's being deployed, how many people are simultaneously using it, what kind of things they are doing, what kind of things you're changing. Are you fiddling around with global fields or calcs, those kinds of things. So I think it's dependent. Robert, do you have any sage wisdom on that?
Yeah. So I mean, live development is something that it's part of what FileMaker is. I mean, we see it all the time, and we strive as a team to ensure that that works well. That said, do I blame someone who understands technology and understands that we have to send data back to a server to be committed, and if something on the network goes awry and packets don't come across perfectly, and we happen to have a bug, and three other things line up that maybe some file corruption could happen, that person is probably not being over paranoid, because technology has those issues, period. Nothing specific to FileMaker. But as a team, as what we strive for for that to be the case, especially as we start moving into cloud. We fully expect people to be creating apps up on the cloud and be modifying them and not having to bring them back down to a local client. And you're seeing, at DevCon, we talked a lot about being, web first, and web, having a big part of the future of the platform. And if you're doing development through that, that's all going to be live. So I think that's part of what makes FileMaker magical. But I do understand. I do understand the folks that have those concerns. I had heard it over the years when I was in support. But I think as we're doing more and more, as Rick mentioned, the being able to push schema changes, where we can have more of a production versus a development environment. I think we'll have better answers for those people that want to be absolutely positively sure that everything is locked down from things that are in production versus development. So I think we've got some good options coming for those folks.
Yeah, it's very good. I do a lot of live development, but I don't. If I have to go in, it has to be on the surface. In other words, if I have to go into the managed database or add new fields, I don't do it while everybody's working on it. That's when I go in at night and do it when everybody's gone home. But to be able to just go in and add a report, or just add a new layout or add some buttons, I can't see any downside to being able to do that. And in fact, it's fabulous.
So one of the areas I think that needs the most improvement at this point for me is an overhaul of the managed database. That includes the tables, the fields, and the relationships graphs. And specifically, I'd like to see folders, tabs, filters, and easier methods for locating table occurrences. What are your thoughts? Can you tell us anything about if that's even on your radar, or are there anything specific you can tell us? I'm looking for any kind of bone you can throw me.
Yeah, it's definitely on our radar. And as I sort of alluded to it earlier, looking at why you're asking for those things, and again, that comes down to when I look at a lot of systems, I see that there's lots and lots of fields that are there just to store a value so that it can be connect a relationship where you're really just trying to query data, or just store some information that's really not relevant to what that table is really tracking. You've got all your global fields in there, and so we're looking at, are there better ways to tackle those problems so that you don't have this unmanageable list of fields that you need to track. And so I'd rather tackle that problem first before we go in and start adding all of these other options. Again, that said, though, when we look at sort of the future of developing in FileMaker, I wouldn't say that we would invest heavily in managed database, that dialogue. What we were talking about earlier, we started taking sort of alternative approaches to how to manage fields as an example. And so it's more of sort of a reimagining about, okay, given sort of where we want to go, given our current sort of expectations from developers, both new and longtime developers, let's just take a step back and figure out what's the right approach to this problem. So I wouldn't say that we're going to go in and start building in a bunch of bells and whistles to manage database. I think we're looking at it at a little bit of a higher level.
I completely understand. The only thing that you've already got that I think falls a little bit short is when you're looking for a table occurrence and you type something and it will highlight that table occurrence. But the highlighting, or the way it's emphasized, is so difficult to see and spot. I've sometimes stared at the screen for 3 minutes trying to figure out where it is. Is it possible to have kind of a more of a dramatic highlighting or a outline?
I mean, sure, it's possible. I'd have to go back and talk with the team. I think that's great feedback. I hadn't heard that one specifically before, but tweaks like that, nothing. I don't want to sort of close the door on anything. As I was saying earlier, we're always looking for, low-hanging fruit, things that can make an impact. So while we might not go in and heavily invest in reworking the managed database dialogue, if there were usability issues that were coming to our attention like that, absolutely, we would look at tweaking them.
That's great.
Yeah, I'd have to agree with Michael on that one. I've stared at the screen for 3 minutes looking for what was highlighted. It really is so difficult. See, at least I'm not sure about Windows because I develop on a Mac. It may be different, but you can't see it on, especially with a complicated, relationship graph. It can be very difficult to see which one you highlighted.
Yeah, definitely.
Good feedback.
Now, I was going to ask about master layouts, but you already really covered it, and I think you called it nested layouts. So we're going to move on. I think Michael has a series of questions he wants to ask that he specifically wrote to ask you guys.
Right. So with the 1 year cycle, is that going to be indefinitely moving forward, or do you see a point in time where you might not release a new version every year, but maybe every 18 years or whatever? 18 months, I meant.
18 years, I don't think so, but the reality is, I think if anything, there's more of a chance we move faster than slower. And we get the we get the complexity of having to do a version update, especially with server. But the reality is, many of the features that we ship, even on a yearly basis, are done many, many, many months before we actually ship, and we're just sitting on that value. So, we're looking at ways of being able to drop additional functionality into the product whenever necessary. Robert, do you have anything else to say about that?
No, I think you summed it up well. I mean, we're focused on getting value out to all of you. I guess the only other thing I will say, because I've heard concerns even about when we went to yearly about it being too frequent and being difficult to keep your apps all updated and all your versions updated. So I do want to say that we understand that, we hear that, and as we pick up our pace and as we try to get value into the product more frequently, and we try to push people to be on the latest and greatest versions for stability and security reasons. We need to figure out how to solve some of those problems. So we've got some ideas, and we'll continue to work through those.
One of the things that is obviously a factor for a lot of developers is that with a new version every year, they've got to spend an enormous amount of time and energy, which is actually money because it's billable time they can't be using, just getting certified for each new version. Has that ever been factored into any kind of decision on this?
To be honest, we don't really look at certification as sort of the driving factor to slow down development. But there, excuse me, if anything, maybe we need to sort of think about certification in a different way. But that would sort of be like the tail wagging the dog, I think.
Right. And the other thing, obviously, nobody's writing books on FileMaker. There used to be a plethora of them, and I write books and publish them on the iTunes store, but nobody seems to be buying books. And with constant changes, nobody's got the time to write up and keep up to date with all the new versions. Have you noticed that?
Yes, I definitely have noticed that. I don't know. I think it's just the nature of how fast tech is moving these days.
Yeah, I think we're kind of moving to a more of a blog world than a book world.
Well, I think so too. What can you tell us about the move to push everything to the cloud? Because it's a little bit confusing for those of us. What exactly does this mean?
Essentially, it's one of those things. Like I said, our job as product managers is to look out and see what's going on out there in the world of technology, and it's just clear that that this is the direction in order to be even considered, especially by new customers, is they don't necessarily want to install a server or convince IT to do that. And public cloud has become a commodity. With elastic computing, we essentially have unlimited computing power and storage at our fingertips, and it enables some very powerful things for mobile and web deployments, to being able to access a lot of data and be able to do AI and machine learning on top of that. And all of those services are essentially coming from the cloud economy. And our intent is that FileMaker continues to live on into the future indefinitely, which means that we've got to keep an eye on that. We could have the greatest product in the world, but if no one wants to install fat clients onto desktops and laptops, then you end up not having customers, right? So I think it's more to that. My excitement more for the cloud is not so much, and it's, I think, big enough as it is to help with the deployment and making it just really easy to go up and running, is all of the things that you can tap into once you're in that environment, from things like microservices to Lambda functions to integrations. And you can rent now the algorithms that Google and Microsoft and Amazon have spent millions and millions of dollars on sub pennies, to be able to leverage them into your product or platform. Ones that we could never hope to build or would take us a decade, they're just available. And so it's such a big, broad world out there and that the cloud enables. It's compelling. And Robert, I don't know if you have anything else to add to that.
No, I think you summed it up well.
So here's a question. This is a loaded question. FM Live Code has now written and released a compiler which will turn any FileMaker solution into an Android application. I haven't looked at this, so I can't really talk intelligently about this, but since this has now been done, do you think this is something that FileMaker might do in the future, either by buying their technology or developing it internally?
We obviously can't make any comment on future things. The thing I can tell you is that having FileMaker run natively on Android devices is not something that is out of the question. We certainly understand if you're not on an iOS device, you're probably on an Android device, and Apple certainly, isn't dictating to us. So I think it's within the realm of possibility, but certainly have nothing to. And we are aware of live code. I think we've talked to the guys just at places like DevCon and stuff, and kudos to them for pulling that off. Robert, anything else to add to that?
Nope. I mean, it's as Rick said at the beginning. It's a top feature request. We understand how businesses run with especially bring your own device and the lack of control over what devices that they're bringing in, and as well as the use cases that are necessary. That WebDirect is a great answer for that in a lot of cases, but in situations where you need to tap into the capabilities of the hardware, that's where it's missing. So we're fully aware of it, and as Rick said, not something that's off the possibility.
One of the things that I've noticed, I don't know quite what you call it, but you have the ability in FileMaker to bring up guidelines for the different screen sizes and devices you're using, like the iPad and the iPhone and everything like that, which is fantastic. But there hasn't been any change to accommodate the larger sizes of the iPad Pro at 10.5 and the big one at 12.3. Is that something that has been overlooked or just not? Where does it stand? Because it would be very helpful to have those extra guides.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this one's a tough one for me because it so for sure is not being overlooked. I'm well aware of it, and it really comes down to we want to do it better. Like we could go in and start adding the stencils. It's as you see devices coming out, from Apple every year, but even looking at using WebDirect on these different tablets and devices, like we would be constantly chasing that and updating those stencils. And ultimately, I don't know that the stencils are even the best approach to that problem. So we're well aware of the limitations we've got there at the moment, but just stay tuned. I think there's going to be a better way for us to approach that.
That's fantastic. Great. We talked briefly about card windows and about WebDirect. Is there a technical reason why that isn't possible as yet, or is it something that you guys are working on, or is it just not really that important?
So it's definitely important to us, and it wasn't a technical issue. It was more just I think I mentioned earlier, we had our team working on the cloud. When I took over for WebDirect, I started hearing a lot of concern from the community. Like, are you still investing in WebDirect? You haven't done any new features in it recently. What's going on? And the truth there is not that we weren't working on it or we weren't investing in WebDirect. It just wasn't in ways that were manifesting themselves as features. There was a lot of work that needed to be done as we marched towards the cloud, as an example. Card window is something that we're working on, though, and I think it will be a big win as far as not just parity with the clients, but the type of interactions that you can create with a web app and meeting your customers' expectations there.
Great. So my last question is about, we already have the ability to type a percentage in the relationship graph and zoom in and zoom out of layouts and screens, but there are many places where that ability doesn't exist. Calculation windows, inspectors, script windows, and for somebody who has getting older, as I am, and my eyesight is deteriorating, I sometimes have to peer really dramatically. Is there any possibility that zoom in functionality will be expand to different areas and perhaps be able to zoom in 25% increments or zoom out in 25% increments instead of 50?
Yeah, so for sure that's something that we've looked at. It just hasn't made it in quite yet. There's lots of, especially when we talk about the actual FileMaker interface, all of your dialogues, the Chrome. It's a little bit more tricky there, but again, that's one of those things that we've heard, from the community, whether it's through the actual community forum or in person. So the only thing I'll say there is well aware of it, and we're thinking about different approaches to solve that problem.
Perfect. Great. Thank
Hey
you.
guys, I have a hard stop right now, so I'm just letting you know.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's been fantastic talking to you.
You're welcome. It was a pleasure.
It was a lot of fun.
And we're done. So that's perfect timing, right? We thank you so much for coming, both of you.
And I'm Michael Rashad.
This is John Mark Osborne. Thanks for coming to the Fireside FileMaker, and please put your comments below. We'd love to hear from you.
Yep, that's same from me. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye. You've been listening to Fireside FileMaker, a podcast with John Mark Osborne and Michael Rashad. We'd love to hear what you think, so please email us at info@firesidefilemaker.com. That's info@firesidefilemaker.com. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.